After 5 quiet years in Maple Ridge, I never imagined that picking up my sick kid early would land me in a nightmare. I opened Tyler's bedroom door and froze. A blonde woman, a total stranger, was stuffing his Star Wars figures into boxes like she owned the place. "This room is way too big for one kid," she said into her phone, completely ignoring me. "Aiden needs storage more than anything." My brain short-circuited. She called my 12-year-old son one kid, like he didn't matter. Like he was furniture to be rearranged. Who was she? Why was she in my home? And who the hell is Aiden? This moment shattered everything I thought I knew about my neighborhood. Comment below and tell me what city you're watching from, because I need to know just how far this madness will travel. The woman finally noticed me standing in the doorway, my mouth probably hanging open like I'd seen a ghost. She didn't flinch, not even an ounce of shame in her eyes. Instead, she straightened up, clutched her wrinkled clipboard against her chest, and gave me this condescending smile that made my blood pressure spike. "Oh good, you're finally here," she said, like I was late to my own house. "I'm Rebecca Morrison, and I'm here on official homeowners association business." She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a crumpled document that looked official. Her clothes told a different story, though. Baggy khaki pants that had seen better days, a wrinkled button-down shirt, and flat shoes that were scuffed beyond repair. I took the paper from her hands, my own shaking slightly from confusion and rising anger. The letterhead looked official enough, complete with the Maple Ridge HOA logo, but something felt off. The document talked about equitable space redistribution and community resource optimization, and fancy words that basically meant they wanted to take my son's bedroom and give it to someone else's kid for storage. At the bottom was what was supposed to be my signature, agreeing to this ridiculous arrangement. Problem was, I'd never seen this document before in my life, and that definitely wasn't my signature. "This is a forgery," I snapped, shaking the paper at her. "I never signed anything like this, and even if I had, you can't just walk into someone's house and start packing their stuff." Rebecca's smile never wavered, but I could see something cold behind her eyes. "Mr. Anderson, I understand this might be confusing for you," she said, in that patronizing tone people use when they think you're stupid. "The new HOA rules say families with certain situations should give up extra space, like my son's room, for others." The way she said certain circumstances made my skin crawl. I knew exactly what she was getting at. Tyler is just one child, and he really doesn't need all this space for his toys and games. My son Aiden is 10 years old and developing his own interests. He needs room to grow and explore his creativity. The audacity was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but you need to get out of my house right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though I wanted to scream. Tyler was sick upstairs with a fever, and the last thing he needed was to see some stranger rifling through his most precious possessions. "This is completely illegal, and if you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." Rebecca let out this little laugh that sounded more like a snort. "Mr. Anderson, you clearly don't understand how HOA regulations work," she said, pulling out her phone. "I have every right to be here, and if anyone should be calling the authorities, it should be me." She started dialing, her fingers moving quickly across the screen while maintaining that infuriating eye contact. Before I could even process what was happening, Rebecca's entire demeanor changed. Her voice became shaky and frightened, like she was talking to a lifeline in the middle of a crisis. 911, yes, I need help immediately," she said, her free hand pressed dramatically against her chest. "There's an African-American man in my house and he's threatening me. He's much bigger than me and I'm scared for my safety." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman had broken into my house, been caught red-handed going through my son's room, and now she was calling the police on me like I was the criminal? "Please send someone quickly," she continued, her voice getting more theatrical by the second. The next few minutes felt like they lasted forever. I watched in disbelief as Rebecca performed her ridiculous act, knowing the police would be here any second. Thinking I was a criminal. Rebecca kept up her scared victim routine, occasionally glancing at me with what I can only describe as smug satisfaction. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew exactly how this was going to play out. This wasn't her first time using this particular strategy, and unfortunately for me, I was about to find out just how effective it could be. The sound of sirens in the distance told me my peaceful afternoon was about to become a whole lot more complicated. Chapter 2: The Setup. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers screeched to a stop in front of my house, lights flashing like an emergency. Officer Martinez, a Hispanic guy who looked like he actually wanted to understand the situation, stepped out of the first car, along with Officer Blake, a white guy whose body language already suggested he'd made up his mind. Rebecca rushed to meet them, her act kicking into overdrive. She had somehow managed to mess up her hair and make her eyes look red and watery. "Thank God you're here," she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "I was so scared. He just appeared out of nowhere and started yelling at me." Officer Blake took one look at me, a 6-foot-tall black man standing in what Rebecca had convinced him was her house, and I could see his hand instinctively move closer to his belt. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them and explain what's going on here," he said in that authoritative tone cops use when they've already decided you're guilty. Meanwhile, Rebecca was showing Officer Martinez her crumpled papers and clipboard, explaining how she was just doing her job as a former HOA president when I supposedly attacked her. "I have all the proper documentation," she continued, producing more fake-looking papers from her oversized purse. "The community voted on new space allocation guidelines." Officer Martinez seemed slightly more skeptical than his partner, asking Rebecca to explain exactly what this redistribution program entailed. That's when Rebecca really went into overdrive with her explanation. "You see, officer, our community believes in fairness and equality," she said, straightening her wrinkled cardigan like it was some kind of official uniform. "Some families have more space than they really need, while others are struggling with storage and living arrangements. The HOA board determined that single-parent households with only one child should share their extra bedrooms with families who have greater needs." The way she said single-parent households while looking directly at me made it crystal clear what this was really about. What really blew my mind was learning about Rebecca's background during this conversation. Apparently, she'd been a successful lawyer just 2 years ago, working for some big firm downtown until she got fired for what she vaguely described as philosophical differences with management. After losing her job, her husband divorced her, and she'd been forced to move back in with her elderly mother in our neighborhood. Being the former HOA president was the only thing that made her feel important anymore, even though she'd been voted out of that position 8 months earlier for mismanaging community funds. The thing that really got to me was watching how the two officers reacted differently to the same information. Officer Martinez kept asking logical questions like, "Where's the official documentation of this vote?" And "How many homeowners actually agreed to this policy?" Rebecca's answers were getting more vague and convoluted by the minute, but Officer Blake seemed satisfied with whatever she was telling him. When I tried to interject that this was my house and I'd never agreed to any of this nonsense, Blake held up his hand like I was interrupting something important. "Sir, let the lady finish explaining the situation," he said, like Rebecca's bizarre story made more sense than the simple fact that she'd broken into my home. During all this chaos, I noticed some of my neighbors had come out to watch the spectacle. Tom Bradley, a white guy in his 40s who lived 2 houses down, was standing on his front porch with his arms crossed, nodding approvingly at whatever Rebecca was saying. Sarah Chen, an Asian woman who lived across the street and usually seemed pretty level-headed, was watching from her window with what looked like genuine concern. But the most interesting reaction came from Rick Thompson, the plumbing contractor who lived next door. Rick was white, probably in his 50s, and had always been friendly enough, but now he was standing in his driveway with this expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't support for Rebecca, but it wasn't exactly support for me either. "Look, officers," I finally said when Rebecca paused to catch her breath. "This is very simple. This is my house, that's my son's bedroom, and this woman broke in and started packing our belongings without permission. I don't care what kind of fake paperwork she's waving around, she has no right to be here." Rebecca immediately jumped back into her victim routine, clutching her chest and taking a step back like I'd just threatened her again. "See? This is exactly the kind of aggressive behavior I was talking about," she said to Officer Blake. "All I was doing was following proper procedures, and he became violent and intimidating. The fact that I hadn't raised my voice, made any threatening gestures, or done anything remotely aggressive didn't seem to matter to Blake. The whole situation reached peak absurdity when Rebecca announced that I had exactly 48 hours to comply with the community decision or face more serious enforcement measures. When Officer Martinez asked what those measures might entail, Rebecca got this smug look on her face and said she had connections with various city departments who could make life very difficult for non-compliant residents. The way she said it made it sound like some kind of official government policy instead of the delusions of a desperate woman clinging to whatever power she thought she still had. As the officers finally prepared to leave, Rebecca made sure to remind them that she'd be filing a formal complaint and that they should expect to hear from her again very soon. Chapter 3: Uncovering the Truth. After the police finally left and Rebecca strutted away like she'd just won some kind of victory, I immediately got on the phone with David Kim, who I knew was the actual current president of our HOA. David's a fellow software engineer, and we'd spoken a few times at community events. What he told me made the whole situation even more bizarre than I'd imagined. Jamal, Rebecca Morrison hasn't been associated with our HOA for almost 8 months, David said, sounding genuinely confused. She was removed from the board last November, after we discovered she'd been misappropriating funds and making unauthorized decisions. She was banned from any HOA activities months ago. Learning that Rebecca had been running a fake HOA scheme was a punch to the gut, but it also explained so much about her behavior and her desperation to seem important and official. David went on to explain that Rebecca had actually created her own splinter group with a handful of neighbors, basically a fake HOA that existed only in her mind and on some illegitimate paperwork. She's been telling people she's still the president and that she has authority to make decisions about community issues, David continued. We've gotten several complaints about her harassing residents and making demands that have no basis in our actual HOA guidelines. That evening, Sarah Chen surprised me by knocking on my door with a bottle of wine and a very serious expression. "Jamal, I need to tell you something about Rebecca Morrison," she said, glancing around nervously like she was worried someone might be watching us. Sarah proceeded to tell me a story that made my skin crawl. Apparently, Rebecca had systematically targeted 3 other minority families in our neighborhood over the past year and a half, using similar tactics to make their lives so miserable that they eventually moved away. There was the Patel family. They're Indian American, and Rebecca kept filing noise complaints about their kids playing in the backyard. She'd call the city about imaginary violations and basically harass them until they couldn't take it anymore. Sarah's story got even worse as she continued. Then there was Maria Santos, a single mother with 2 kids who moved here from Puerto Rico. Rebecca started a rumor that Maria was dealing drugs because she had visitors at different times of the day. It turns out Maria worked 3 jobs to afford living here, and the suspicious visitors were just her babysitters and her mother coming to help with the kids. But Rebecca made such a big deal about it that Maria eventually gave up and moved back in with family across town. The pattern was becoming sickeningly clear. Rebecca had found a way to weaponize racial anxiety and community fear to drive out families she deemed undesirable. The most disturbing part of Sarah's revelations was learning about Rebecca's social media presence. She'd created a private group called Maple Ridge Neighborhood Watch, where she posted photos of minority residents, speculated about their activities, and encouraged other members to report anything they found suspicious. Sarah had been added to the group early on, but stayed in it to monitor what Rebecca was doing. "Jamal, some of the things she posts about you and Tyler are absolutely disgusting," Sarah said, showing me screenshots. "She's been taking pictures of your house for months, documenting when you come and go, even photographing Tyler when he's playing outside. It's full-on stalking behavior." The next morning, Rick Thompson appeared at my door with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. "Jamal, I need to come clean about something," he said, clearly uncomfortable. Rick explained that Rebecca had approached him about 6 months earlier with what she called a neighborhood improvement initiative. She'd convinced him and several other neighbors that property values were declining because of certain demographic changes in the community. At first, Rick thought she was talking about legitimate community improvement projects like better landscaping. But then Rebecca started getting more specific about what she meant, Rick continued. She'd make comments about how those people don't maintain their properties the same way, or how urban families bring different kinds of problems to suburban neighborhoods. Rick's awakening to Rebecca's true motives had been gradual, but her behavior during yesterday's incident had made it impossible for him to ignore what was really going on. "When I saw her in your house yesterday, going through Tyler's stuff like she owned the place, I knew I'd been played. This woman isn't trying to improve anything. She's just a racist who's found a clever way to hide her hatred behind fake community activism." The final piece of information that Rick shared was perhaps the most important and the most dangerous. Rebecca had apparently been bragging to her little group about having connections in various city departments who could help her make life difficult for problem residents. Whether these connections were real or just more of Rebecca's delusional fantasies didn't really matter. What mattered was that she believed she had this power and was willing to use it. "Jamal, I think she's planning something bigger than just harassing you about Tyler's room," Rick warned me. "Yesterday was just the beginning. She's going to escalate this until either you give up and move away, or something really bad happens that she can use against you." As Rick left and I stood in my driveway looking around at the neighborhood I'd called home for 5 years, I realized that everything I thought I knew about this place had been an illusion. Rebecca Morrison wasn't just some crazy lady with too much time on her hands. She was a predator who'd been systematically hunting families like mine. Chapter 4: The War Escalates. Rebecca didn't waste any time moving to the next phase of her campaign against my family. 3 days after the bedroom incident, I came home from work to find a woman from Child Protective Services standing on my doorstep with a clipboard and a very serious expression. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Jennifer Walsh from CPS, and I need to speak with you about some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your son Tyler," she said, showing me her official identification. My heart immediately started pounding because every black parent knows that CPS showing up at your door is one of the most terrifying things that can happen to your family. The allegations were so ridiculous, they would have been funny if they weren't potentially devastating. According to the report, Tyler was frequently left alone for extended periods. The house contained hazardous materials that posed a danger to children, and there were concerns about unusual adult visitors who might be involved in illegal activities. Every single claim was completely fabricated, but I knew that CPS investigations could drag on for months and completely destroy a family's life, even when the allegations were proven false. Ms. Walsh was professional and seemed genuinely interested in getting to the truth, but she still had to follow protocol and conduct a full investigation based on the complaint that had been filed. During the home inspection, Ms. Walsh kept asking questions that made it clear someone had fed her very specific information about our daily routine. The report mentions that Tyler is often seen playing outside unsupervised after dark, she said, making notes. It also says there are frequent visitors at unusual hours, and that you've been heard yelling at your son in ways that suggest possible abuse. I explained that Tyler played basketball in our driveway until dinner time during the summer, that my unusual visitors were mostly colleagues who occasionally stopped by to discuss work projects, and that any yelling was probably me cheering during basketball games on TV. The most infuriating part was realizing how much detailed surveillance Rebecca must have been conducting to provide such specific false information. She knew Tyler's after-school schedule, she'd been documenting when people came to our house and how long they stayed, and she'd even somehow gathered information about our weekend routines. This wasn't just casual neighborhood observation, this was systematic stalking that had been going on for months without me realizing it. The thought that this woman had been watching my 12-year-old son and taking notes about his daily activities made me feel sick. While I was dealing with the CPS investigation, Rebecca was simultaneously launching attacks on other fronts. I started getting notices from the city about various violations that needed to be addressed immediately or face fines and legal action. My grass was allegedly too long according to city ordinances, even though I'd mowed it 3 days earlier. There were complaints about unauthorized modifications to my driveway, referring to the basketball hoop that had been there when I bought the house 5 years ago. I even got a notice about improper storage of recreational vehicles, because Tyler's bicycle was visible in our garage when the door was open. Each violation notice required me to take time off work to meet with city inspectors, fill out paperwork, and provide documentation proving that the allegations were false. The process was designed to be time-consuming and frustrating, and I could see how someone with less job flexibility might eventually give up and move rather than continue fighting. Rebecca had clearly done this before and knew exactly which buttons to push to make the city bureaucracy work in her favor. What she didn't count on was my stubborn refusal to be driven away from the home where Tyler and I had built our life together. The harassment campaign reached a new level of absurdity when I discovered that Rebecca had hired some kind of private investigator to follow me around and take photographs. Rick Thompson spotted the guy first, a scruffy-looking man in his 50s driving a beat-up sedan who'd been parked across from my house at various times during the week. "Jamal, that car's been there every day when I leave for work," Rick told me. "Yesterday I saw the driver taking pictures of your house with a long lens camera." When I confronted the man directly, he claimed to be conducting a property assessment for insurance purposes, but he couldn't provide any identification or explain why an insurance assessment would require covert surveillance. The photographs this investigator was taking were being used to create a false narrative about our family's activities and lifestyle. Rebecca had somehow gotten pictures of Tyler and me that made our normal father-son interactions look suspicious or inappropriate. A photo of me helping Tyler with his bike maintenance became evidence of me forcing a child to do manual labor. A picture of Tyler's friends coming over to play basketball was presented as proof of unsupervised gatherings of minors. Even our weekend trips to the grocery store were being documented and interpreted as something sinister. The final straw came when Tyler himself became directly involved in Rebecca's scheme. My son came home from school one day looking confused and scared, asking me questions that no 12-year-old should have to think about. "Dad, why did that lady ask me about who comes to our house and what we do when you're at work?" Tyler said, clearly disturbed. It turned out that Rebecca had approached Tyler while he was waiting for the school bus, pretending to be conducting some kind of neighborhood survey. She had asked him detailed questions about our family's routine, who his friends were, whether I ever left him alone, and whether anyone ever came to the house that made him feel uncomfortable. The fact that she was now directly targeting my child crossed every line I could imagine. Chapter 5. Turning the Tables. I had enough of playing defense against Rebecca's increasingly desperate attacks. I'd had enough. It was time to fight back and expose everything Rebecca had done. My first call was to David Kim, the real HOA president, to discuss legal options for dealing with Rebecca's fake organization and harassment campaign. David put me in touch with the HOA's lawyer, who was shocked by the extent of Rebecca's deception and eager to help build a case against her. What you're describing isn't just harassment, the lawyer explained. She's committed multiple felonies, including identity theft, fraud, stalking, and possibly extortion. We need to document everything she's done and get law enforcement involved at a much higher level. The attorney's investigation into Rebecca's activities revealed a pattern of criminal behavior that went far beyond what any of us had realized. She'd been forging signatures on official documents for over a year, creating fake HOA bylaws and regulations that had no legal standing whatsoever. More disturbing was the discovery that she'd been collecting HOA fees from residents based on these fake regulations, essentially running a sophisticated scam that had netted her several $1,000s in fraudulent income. She's been operating what amounts to a criminal enterprise, the lawyer told me. This isn't just about harassing your family. She's been systematically defrauding the entire community while using racial intimidation to maintain control. Rick Thompson became my most valuable ally in gathering evidence against Rebecca, partly because he felt guilty about initially supporting her fake neighborhood improvement initiative, and partly because he'd started receiving threats from her when she realized he was no longer cooperating. Jamal, she called me at 2 a.m. last week, screaming about how I was betraying the community and how she was going to make sure everyone knew I was a race traitor, Rick told me, showing me his phone records. That's when I realized this woman isn't just racist, she's genuinely mentally unstable. She thinks she's fighting some kind of war for the soul of the neighborhood, and anyone who doesn't support her is automatically the enemy. Rick had been secretly recording his conversations with Rebecca for the past month, and the audio files were absolutely damning. In one recording, Rebecca explicitly stated that her goal was to clean out all the undesirable elements from Maple Ridge and make it the kind of community where good families would want to raise their children. She bragged about successfully driving out the 3 previous minority families and described her strategy for making my family's life so miserable that we'd eventually give up and move away. Most shocking was hearing her laugh about the fake CPS report and joke about how those people always have something to hide when you dig deep enough. The breakthrough moment came when Sarah Chen provided me with access to Rebecca's private social media group, where she'd been documenting her surveillance activities in disturbing detail. Screenshots of the group showed not just the photos Rebecca had been taking of our house, but detailed logs of our family's daily activities, license plate numbers of visitors, and even speculation about our financial situation based on our observations of our shopping habits and home maintenance. She'd created what was essentially a stalker's playbook, complete with maps of our property, schedules of our routines, and strategies for gathering more intrusive information about our personal lives. Even more damaging were the group's discussions about tactics for escalating pressure on families that weren't responding to initial harassment. Rebecca had shared detailed instructions on how to file false reports with various city departments, how to phrase complaints to CPS to trigger automatic investigations, and how to coordinate with other group members to create the appearance of widespread community concern about a targeted family. She's literally teaching other people how to destroy families using bureaucratic warfare, Sarah said, her disgust evident. This isn't just about racism. She's creating a blueprint for how to weaponize local government against anyone she doesn't like. The most horrifying discovery was evidence that Rebecca had been attempting to involve Tyler directly in her scheme by trying to turn him against me. Security camera footage from a neighbor's house showed Rebecca approaching Tyler multiple times over the past few weeks, not just the school bus incident he'd told me about. In these interactions, she'd been asking Tyler leading questions designed to get him to say negative things about our home life, offering him candy and small gifts, and even suggesting that he might be happier living with a more stable family situation. The footage showed Tyler clearly uncomfortable with these interactions, but Rebecca persisting with her inappropriate questioning despite his obvious distress. Armed with this evidence, I contacted the FBI's local field office to report what was clearly a pattern of civil rights violations and organized harassment based on racial discrimination. Agent Thompson, a black woman in her 40s who specialized in hate crimes and housing discrimination, was immediately interested in Rebecca's activities. Mr. Anderson, what you're describing fits a pattern we've been seeing in suburban communities across the country, she explained. Individuals using fake authority and bureaucratic harassment to drive minority families out of predominantly white neighborhoods. The difference in your case is how well documented everything is. Most victims don't have this level of evidence when they come to us. Agent Thompson's investigation moved quickly once she saw the scope of Rebecca's operation. Within days, she had obtained warrants to search Rebecca's home and seize her computers, phones, and any documents related to her fake HOA activities. The search revealed even more evidence of Rebecca's criminal behavior, including detailed files on dozens of neighborhood families, fake official documents that she'd been creating and distributing, and financial records showing the money she'd fraudulently collected from residents. Perhaps most disturbing was discovering that Rebecca had been maintaining surveillance files on children in the neighborhood, including inappropriate photographs and personal information that she had no legitimate reason to possess. The final piece of evidence that sealed Rebecca's fate came from an unexpected source. Her own son Aiden, the 10-year-old boy she'd claimed needed Tyler's bedroom for storage space. During the FBI's investigation, Aiden was interviewed by a trained child psychologist who discovered that Rebecca had been coaching him to lie about our family and make false statements that could be used to support her harassment campaign. She told me to say that the black man next door was scary and that his son was mean to me, Aiden revealed, clearly relieved to finally tell the truth. But Tyler's actually really nice, and his dad always waves at me when I'm playing outside. Mom said if I didn't say those things, bad people would come live in our neighborhood and hurt our family. Chapter 6. Justice Comes Calling. The morning Rebecca Morrison's world finally collapsed started like any other day, except this time I was ready for whatever crazy scheme she might try next. I'd installed additional security cameras around my property, coordinated with Rick and Sarah to document any suspicious activity, and even arranged for Tyler to stay with my sister until the FBI finished their investigation. What I wasn't prepared for was the sheer desperation Rebecca would display when she realized her elaborate harassment campaign was falling apart around her. Agent Thompson had warned me that cornered individuals like Rebecca often escalated their behavior in unpredictable ways, but I still wasn't ready for what happened next. Around 10 a.m., I was working from home when Rick called, frantic. "Jamal, you need to get over here right now," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Rebecca's in your backyard with some kind of tools, and she's doing something to your water pipes. I tried to stop her, but she started screaming at me about property damage and threatened to call the police on me for trespassing." I grabbed my phone to record whatever insanity was about to unfold and headed outside to find Rebecca Morrison crouched next to my house with a wrench, apparently trying to sabotage my plumbing system. She wore her usual baggy clothes and scuffed shoes, but now she was completely unhinged, her hair disheveled and her eyes wild with the kind of desperate energy you see in people who know they're about to lose everything. "Rebecca, what the hell are you doing?" I called out, making sure to keep my distance while I filmed her with my phone. She looked up at me with this mixture of rage and triumph that made my skin crawl. "I'm documenting safety violations on this property," she said, waving the wrench around like it was some kind of official inspection tool. "These pipes are leaking and creating hazardous conditions that affect the entire neighborhood. As the HOA president, I have the authority to take immediate action to protect community welfare." The fact that she was actively trying to create the very problems she was claiming to document would have been hilarious if it wasn't so destructive and dangerous. Rick had called the police before confronting Rebecca directly, and 2 officers arrived just as she was attempting to loosen what looked like a main water connection to my house. Officer Martinez, who'd been at my house during the original bedroom incident, immediately recognized both Rebecca and me from their previous visit. This time, however, the situation was much clearer. There was no ambiguity about who was where they were supposed to be and who was trespassing with intent to commit vandalism. "Ma'am, you need to put down that tool and step away from the property," Officer Martinez said firmly. "You're on private property without permission, and you appear to be attempting to damage someone else's plumbing system." When caught red-handed, Rebecca doubled down on her fake authority, but this time it backfired spectacularly. "Officer, I am Rebecca Morrison. president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, and I am conducting an emergency inspection of this property based on multiple complaints from concerned residents, she announced, still clutching the wrench. This man has been allowing dangerous conditions to exist on his property, and I have the legal authority to take corrective action. Officer Martinez asked to see her identification and any documentation of this supposed authority, which is when Rebecca's entire house of cards started tumbling down. As Rebecca fumbled through her oversized purse looking for fake documents that would somehow legitimize her presence in my backyard with a wrench, Agent Thompson and 2 other FBI agents arrived on the scene. The timing was perfect. They'd been planning to arrest Rebecca that afternoon anyway, but finding her in the act of attempting to vandalize my property gave them additional charges to work with. Rebecca Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, fraud, stalking, harassment, and now attempted vandalism, Agent Thompson announced, producing her badge and handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right. The arrest scene was like something out of a movie, except instead of being dramatic and intense, it was mostly just pathetic. Rebecca continued trying to maintain her fake authority even as she was being handcuffed, insisting that the FBI agents were making a terrible mistake and that she was the victim of some kind of conspiracy. This is exactly what I've been trying to protect our community from, she screamed as they led her toward the FBI vehicle. These people have connections, and they're using the system against law-abiding citizens who just want to preserve their neighborhood values. Even in handcuffs, she couldn't bring herself to admit what she'd actually been doing, or take responsibility for the damage she'd caused to so many families. As word of Rebecca's arrest spread through the neighborhood, it was fascinating to watch how quickly the dynamic shifted among the residents who'd previously supported her fake HOA initiative. Tom Bradley, who'd been nodding approvingly during the original police visit, suddenly appeared at my door with a casserole and a very awkward apology. Jamal, I had no idea Rebecca was doing all those crazy things, he said, clearly uncomfortable with having to admit he'd been fooled. She told us she was just trying to improve property values and make the neighborhood safer for everyone. I never thought she was targeting specific families or making up all those lies about you and Tyler. The casserole was nice, but what I really appreciated was Tom's willingness to publicly acknowledge that he'd been wrong and to support my family going forward. Sarah Chen, who'd been secretly helping me gather evidence against Rebecca from the beginning, finally felt safe enough to tell other neighbors about what she'd witnessed and documented. At an impromptu neighborhood gathering that evening, she showed several residents screenshots from Rebecca's private social media group, including the surveillance photos and racist comments that had been posted about minority families. The reaction was a mixture of shock, disgust, and embarrassment that someone in their community had been operating such a hateful campaign right under everyone's noses. We all need to take responsibility for letting this happen, Sarah said. Rebecca couldn't have done what she did without the rest of us being passive and not asking harder questions about what was really going on. The best moment of the day came when Officer Blake, who'd sided with Rebecca earlier, had to eat his words. Agent Thompson made sure he understood exactly how wrong he'd been about the situation and how his implicit bias had nearly allowed a dangerous criminal to continue her harassment campaign. Officer Blake, your initial response to this situation enabled Rebecca Morrison to continue victimizing residents of this community, she said, in front of several other law enforcement officials. In the future, I suggest you focus on gathering facts rather than making assumptions based on the race of the people involved. Blake's face turned about 6 different shades of red, but he managed to mumble an apology and slink away with what was left of his dignity. Chapter 7. Sweet Victory and New Beginnings. 3 months after Rebecca's arrest, Maple Ridge finally felt peaceful again. The FBI's investigation had uncovered the full scope of Rebecca's criminal enterprise, resulting in charges that would likely keep her in prison for several years. She'd been convicted of civil rights violations, fraud, stalking, harassment, identity theft, and attempted vandalism, with additional charges pending related to her fraudulent collection of HOA fees and her inappropriate surveillance of neighborhood children. The judge had been particularly harsh during sentencing, noting that Rebecca's crimes represented a systematic campaign of racial intimidation disguised as community activism. Tyler had returned home from staying with my sister and immediately set about reclaiming his bedroom from the psychological violation Rebecca had committed. We spent a weekend completely redecorating the space, painting the walls a new color and rearranging his furniture to make it feel fresh and completely his own again. Dad, I'm glad that crazy lady is gone, Tyler said while we were hanging up his new Star Wars posters. I was scared she was going to keep trying to take our stuff or hurt us somehow. The resilience kids show in bouncing back from traumatic situations never ceases to amaze me, but I was also proud of how Tyler had handled himself throughout the entire ordeal, staying calm, telling the truth, and never letting Rebecca's harassment make him feel ashamed of who he was or where he lived. The neighborhood transformation that followed Rebecca's removal from the community was remarkable to witness. David Kim, the real HOA president, organized a series of community meetings to address the damage Rebecca had caused and to implement new policies that would prevent anyone from using fake authority to harass residents in the future. We established clear procedures for verifying HOA communications, created anonymous reporting systems for residents who felt they were being targeted for harassment, and, most importantly, developed educational programs to help people recognize and report hate-based discrimination when they saw it happening. The 3 families that Rebecca had successfully driven away from Maple Ridge were contacted by the new community leadership and invited to return with formal apologies and offers of assistance with moving expenses. The Patel family decided to give Maple Ridge another chance and moved back into their old house, which had been sitting empty since they'd been harassed into leaving. Maria Santos chose to stay where she was, but accepted the community's apology and became involved in our new anti-discrimination initiatives. The 3rd family had moved too far away to return, but they expressed gratitude that Rebecca had finally been held accountable for what she'd done to them. Rick Thompson had become one of my closest friends through the whole ordeal, bonded by our shared experience of dealing with Rebecca's manipulation and intimidation. He felt genuinely guilty about initially supporting her fake community improvement campaign, and he channeled that guilt into becoming one of the most vocal advocates for tolerance and inclusion in our neighborhood. Jamal, I learned something important about myself through all this, Rick told me one evening while we were grilling burgers in my backyard. I thought I was a good person who would never support racism, but Rebecca showed me how easy it is to get sucked into hate when it's dressed up as something positive. I never want to be that naive again. Sarah Chen had emerged as an unofficial community leader, using her experience monitoring Rebecca's social media harassment to help other neighborhoods identify and address similar problems. She'd been invited to speak at several community forums about recognizing online hate groups and protecting vulnerable residents from systematic harassment. What happened with Rebecca isn't unique to Maple Ridge, Sarah explained to a group of HOA presidents from around the region. There are people like her in communities everywhere, using fake authority and racial fear to drive out families they don't think belong. The only way to stop them is for good people to pay attention and speak up when they see what's happening. The most unexpected development was learning what had happened to Rebecca's son Aiden after her arrest. The poor kid had been placed with a foster family while social services tried to locate suitable relatives, but it turned out that Rebecca's ex-husband was completely unaware of how disturbed she'd become after their divorce. When he learned about Rebecca's criminal activities and the psychological damage she'd been inflicting on Aiden, he immediately petitioned for full custody and moved his son across the country to start fresh. Even more surprisingly, Aiden's new foster family during the transition period was an African-American couple who specialized in helping children recover from trauma, a development that Rebecca would have found absolutely horrifying if she'd known about it. Tyler and I attended Rebecca's sentencing hearing not out of any desire for revenge, but because Agent Thompson thought it was important for the judge to see the human impact of Rebecca's crimes. As Rebecca stood before the judge in her orange prison uniform, she still couldn't bring herself to take full responsibility for what she'd done. "Your Honor, I was only trying to protect my community," she said during her statement. "I may have made some mistakes in judgment, but my intentions were always to preserve the values and safety that make neighborhoods like ours special places to raise families." Even facing years in prison, she was still trying to justify her racism and harassment as community service. The judge's response was everything I could have hoped for and more. "Ms. Morrison, what you call protecting your community was actually a systematic campaign of racial intimidation that violated the civil rights of multiple families and traumatized children in your neighborhood," Judge Williams said sternly. "Your actions represent the worst kind of prejudice, hatred disguised as civic duty. The sentence I'm imposing today reflects not just the crimes you committed, but the damage you caused to the very concept of community that you claim to have been protecting." As Rebecca was led away to begin her 5-year prison sentence, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected, not because I was happy to see her punished, but because justice had finally been served for all the families she'd targeted. 6 months later, I was elected as the new president of the Maple Ridge HOA, running on a platform of inclusion, transparency, and genuine community building. Tyler had started middle school with a confidence and sense of belonging that made me proud every single day. Our neighborhood had become the kind of place Rebecca claimed she was trying to create: safe, welcoming, and filled with families who looked out for each other regardless of race, background, or family structure. Rebecca Morrison had tried to drive us away from our home, but in the end, she was the one who had to leave. Not just our neighborhood, but society itself, at least for the next few years. Sometimes justice takes a while to arrive, but when it finally shows up, it's worth the wait.